Today we're going to have an introduction to the story Frankenstein. So the premise of Frankenstein is the actual creation of man. Now in her novel, Mary Shelley does not tell how Victor Frankenstein breathes life into his creation, saying only that success crowned, quote, days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue. Still, Shelley's story did not arise from the void. Scientists and physicians of her time were exploring life and death through experiments with lower organisms, through human anatomical studies, and even with attempts to resuscitate drowning victims and experiments using electricity to restore life to the recently dead. So we look at literary parallels. Where has Mary Shelley pulled her story from? Well, the Frankenstein subtitle was originally The Modern Prometheus. Now, Prometheus means forethought. Now, as a reward for being the only Titan to not rebel against him, Zeus assigned Prometheus the task of forming man. So the Titan Prometheus became fond of his creation. He stole the secret of fire from Zeus and deprived humans of their knowledge of the future, giving them hope instead. So Prometheus is often seen as a benefactor of humankind. He's the one who helped create man. He's the one who helped them with fire. He's the one who, and instead of giving them the forethought of the future, he gives them the sense of hope. So what does it mean to be a modern Prometheus? Well, Zeus is a little upset with our Titan Prometheus. So in response to his betrayal, Zeus chained Prometheus to a rock where a vulture pecked out his liver, which regenerated itself each night so that the punishment was eternal. Now, early in the 19th century, Prometheus had become an accepted image of a creative artist. So Shelley created a radical shift by transferring the metaphor of Prometheus as an artist to Prometheus as a scientist. By creating her modern Prometheus as a scientist, Shelley is suggesting that science is as creative as art. So when we look at the context of the structure of Frankenstein, there are three concentric layers of the text that are presented now in 3 different volumes. The first volume of Frankenstein, Captain Robert Walton's letters home to his sister that are bookending the story. You also see in the structure the narrative related by Victor Frankenstein to Captain Walton, and those are between the letters. And then, of course, the creature's story is central throughout the novel. So when we look at these 3 concentric parts of the novel, we see that Walton's story of his voyage to the pole is a similar tale for the reader confronting the story of Frankenstein. There is this parallel situation between Walton and Frankenstein. Each has a solitary nature, each feels largely self-educated, and each is obsessed with their quest, and they suffer from hubris afterwards. Now, Frankenstein's narrative warns Walton of the price payable for egocentric obsessions. And then the third story we have is the creature's story itself. This communicates a number of views and values. It uses a religious or philosophical ideal that man is essentially good. The creature is like Satan or a fallen angel. Now, his passionate responses to nature are typically romantic, which is when this comes from. It's the literary era of Romanticism. And isolation and loneliness are no good spiritually for someone, much like when Frankenstein is isolating himself with his science. So when we look at the narrative technique, it is evidentiary. And this occurs when the story is told from a number of different perspectives who all view the same events differently. Remember, this is a story of the creature that is being created, but his creation is being done by Frankenstein. So you need to look at Frankenstein's narrative. How did he bring this creature to life? And then bookending the story, we have Walton's letters, who are looking at the egotism of Frankenstein and himself. So the story is being told from all of these different perspectives who all view the same events differently. So in essence, you have 3 narrators and also letters from other characters. So what are some of the key ideas that you're going to see coming throughout the novel? Well, the first one is the sense of knowledge. Victor is seeking knowledge for his own reasons on creation. It does not consider the ramifications, and that's the very romantic view here, where he's going to create, he's going to explore, and he's not considering what's going to happen next. Now, Walton is a similar character to Frankenstein. He's just not as dangerously progressed as Victor Frankenstein. Now, Victor focused on alchemy before going to his university and learning about the new sciences. Another one of our key ideas is going to be education. Now, Romantics favor a natural education. You're going to be educated through reading, through going on adventures, for providing for your self-growth, rather than a formal education in school. So we find out that Walton is self-educated. He tells you, my education was neglected, yet I was passionately fond of reading. The creature also learns from the de Lacy's non-formal schooling. Next key issue would be the sense of family, or moreover the sense of being a parent. Now we have to think into our sense of the author. The author, Mary Shelley, loses her mother early in her life, and so she probably felt a sense of a lack of parenthood. Now Elizabeth's mother dies during her childbirth, and so Victor does not care for the creature he even parented. Even though Victor is the real monster here, he's neglecting his own child. So critiques the notion of the individual, or the solitariness and the introversion, which at the time was being expressed positively. As you look throughout the entire novel, there just seems to be a lack of parenting. There's this feeling of neglect from several characters throughout the entire story. What is the genre? Well, it is Gothic. I know it comes from the Romantic movement, and therefore we're going to talk about Romantics throughout this, but we have to look at the sense of the Gothic novel. Now, the Gothic novel starts in the mid-18th and continues throughout the mid-19th century, and it's distinctive for its fascination with the horrible, the repellent, and the grotesque, and the supernatural, in combination with many of the characteristics of the Romantic novel. Now, Gothic has an emphasis on emotion. The Gothic art and architecture was intended to have a magical or preternatural effect on the viewer. And a Gothic building is a perfect setting for a story intended to terrify, or at least to overwhelm the reader. We also have dangerous natural settings being employed. For example, Walton exploring the pole. Now, when we look at characters in a Gothic novel, characters have a chronic sense of apprehension and the premonition of some sort of impending disaster, and usually that is not identified to the reader. Now, the Gothic world is a fallen world with characters living in fear. They feel this sense of neglect and alienation. They're haunted by images of civilized expulsion and by the unavoidable repercussions that follow from their actions. So when we take a look at Plotline, the action tends to take place at night or in a very sunless environment. The description is very key here when they describe the nature and surroundings. Some motifs of a typical Gothic fiction include images of death or images of revenge. There could be some family curse. Maybe there's a doppelganger to your main character. There could be demonic possession or masking or shape-changing and some outright madness. Now, these motifs and settings are prevalent throughout our own novel here. So when Frankenstein is being centered around a thirst for knowledge and sciences, he has a tendency to overreach the science of the day. And so it gives us this sense of a forbidden knowledge about the mysteries of life. So the emphasis in Frankenstein is more on that sense of psychological terror, a very classic Gothic notion. Now, the scientific experiment can be seen as arguing that the masculine aspect of reproduction can only reanimate the dead, and by nature, it begins to alienate family. This man can create life on his own without the need of a family, without the need of the feminine and nurturing aspect of reproduction. And if he had that, that would likely have saved the creature from his lonely life. So when we come back from Gothic and look at the sense of the Romantic movement, we take a look at the context. The preference for the grandeur and the picturesque, the sublime, the passionate, the extraordinary beauty, as opposed to the completion and proportion. You're going to get a lot of description of rugged landscapes in Frankenstein. That is a classic romantic type. The creature's moved by the power of the natural world, and Frankenstein escapes to nature to think. Walton seeks to subjugate nature. Nature is a classical form of the romantic movement, so you're going to see a lot of nature being expressed. And of course, the natural world reflects the danger and the trauma of the emotional worlds of the characters. They go out to nature to escape, or they go out to nature in order to subjugate it. And of course, with the romantic, we're not just looking at the sense of nature, but of human nature. So we're going to explore the emotional directness of personal experience. Because we're going to bring in some of the Gothic movement as well, you're going to see extremes, extreme rapture and joy, extreme nostalgia for childhood or the past that's gone, extreme horror, extreme melancholy, or extreme sentimentality. You're also going to see the cultivation of the exotic and the bizarre or the macabre. After all, we are creating life here, and the science and the interest of the realms of dreams and delirium, a very classic romantic notion. Now, with Frankenstein being a romantic novel, the growth of the individual mind is enabled through knowledge of and closeness to nature. It doesn't come from man, it comes from nature. Now, Frankenstein can be a moral fable on the self-destructive consequences of idealism and define the laws of nature in a quest for passionately knowing. Man is trying to overcome nature, and that is where the fault lies. Self-awareness in the Romantic period is also only a state which must be passed through, so we can transcend it. The Romantic movement is going to move into a transcendentalist literary movement soon, so you see this sense of transition here. Frankenstein's creature moves through the layers of self-awareness to develop into a modern man, a modern Prometheus. However, while he finds his own self, he does not develop to the next stage. He stays egocentric and unable to truly understand what's beyond himself, his own passions, his own needs. Now, Shelley's protagonist is so completely engrossed in his own ego that he must create a being to reassure himself of his own existence. His own self-awareness is alienating him from life, and it causes him to become a solitary figure. He'll escape to nature in order to get away from family problems. He'll escape into his lab and into science and into education in order to escape from his life. He creates another being who stands as a double or a doppelganger or subconscious element of himself. So now this grotesque usurpation of bodies essentially deepens his own crisis of self-consciousness. Destruction and reanimation of yourself is not improving yourself. Now, there is a sense of a doppelganger in Frankenstein's creature. The creature is a magnified image of the self of the creator. We're looking at Victor's profound ego and his profound narcissism. After all, the size that he made of the creature is huge. Now, Frankenstein concedes that the monster he created is in essence a part of his own spirit, his mirror. He says, "This is my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave and forced to destroy all that was dear to me." Now, Frankenstein becomes the epitome of egotism and self-consciousness. Now, to Walton, who he's writing letters to, the Frankenstein confesses that his eyes became insensible to the charms of nature. And the same feelings caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent. Now, the wounded deer Frankenstein comes across in the Alpine Valley is seen as a type of me. So Frankenstein's so self-obsessed, he cannot consider the possibility that it may be Elizabeth and not himself who dies at the hand of the monster on their wedding night. And when he does consider the scenario of his own death, he is again self-gratifyingly morbid. He states, "Yet when I thought of my beloved Elizabeth, of her tears and endless sorrow, when she would find her lover so barbarously snatched from her, tears, the first I had shed for months, streamed from my eyes. Again, even when he's worried about other characters, he's only thinking of himself. Now let's look at the themes of Frankenstein. Topics to look for. I would look for the use of knowledge for good or for evil. That sense of good versus evil is definitely part of the Romantic movement, and you're definitely going to find it in Frankenstein. The invasion of technology into modern life. With the movement of the Industrial Revolution at the time of the Romantic movement, you're going to start seeing a more modernized life come into play. The treatment of the poor or the uneducated. The power of nature in the face of unnatural events, and nature versus nurture. Nature is a huge element of Romanticism. And so when we look at the idea of nature in its physical comportments, as we escape to nature, or as we try to subjugate nature, or as we look at the idea of nature versus nurture, the idea of human nature. Lots of topics to look for in Frankenstein. Lastly, let's look at some Hollywood stereotypes. A lot of times when people think of the story of Frankenstein, they go to the sense of pop culture and the sense of movies first. So we have seen several movies made of Frankenstein. James Whale directed the 1931 film Frankenstein, where our image of the creature first comes from. Now, in the film, a mad scientist creates a creature with little intelligence who rages against humanity. It's not the original form that Mary Shelley had written, but it is the sense of Frankenstein that most people would define today. Now, in pop culture, there's over 100 films made about Frankenstein, and we've even used Frankenstein to sell merchandise. We see it on Twix candy bars, Levi's jeans, Coca-Cola, more famously in Frankenberry cereal. We've even seen Pez that's been made with the idealization of a Frankenstein character. And of course, some Frankenstein movie titles are just absolutely bizarre, where we've had Frankenstein creating a creature. Now we take a look at Frankenstein's Musical Christmas, Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, Frankenstein versus Dracula, Frankenstein the College Years, Young Frankenstein. People will take the ideal or the notion of the creature and move it into different genres. Thanks so much for stopping by to learn a little bit more about Frankenstein. If you'd like me to go through some chapters of Frankenstein or more summarizing, if you'd like to learn more about other books from the Romantic movement, please leave comments down below to let me know what else you'd like to see on this channel. And as always, I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe. Thanks for stopping by.